Hey, BassGeek here, and today we're going to talk about a jig that I think is a game changer and when you should use it in the post spawn to catch more bass. I got a few. So let's talk about post spawn bass first and jigs. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can attack post spawn bass. Football head jigs are great, out on points, secondary points, transitional areas. One of the ways that I like to do it, and one of my favorite ways to actually use a jig during the post spawn, is flipping. And I mean flipping anything and everything. We're talking about steep banks, channel swings, you name it, laydowns, brush, stumps, boat docks, marinas, anything those bass can pull out to and suspend around. That's where they're going to be. And so when it comes down to post spawn, one of the things I like to do is pull out a flipping jig. Now, that's kind of what I would call this particular jig. It's really designed to be flipped, pitched, thrown into the trash, hence the name Trashmaster. This bait was actually designed by the same bait maker that came up with the Rage Flange. He sold that patent to Spawn and Strike King and the Guggen Squad, but he's been around forever, and he has designed a lot of your favorite baits. Guys, this jig over the past year, and as an old head, I discovered it in a mystery tackle box. No, this is not a sponsored video. I bought every single one of these jigs myself with my own money, just because I got one in the mystery tackle box. And this is not a mystery tackle box video at all. It has nothing to do with mystery tackle box. But I actually did discover these jigs through them. And it's probably one of the most different designs that I've seen in a jig in a long, long time. So first off, let's get into the basis of why I like this jig. So we are talking about the Trashmaster jig. Now this jig, and there will be links in the bottom for all the stuff that we're about to talk about here. This jig is actually a very diverse jig. So let's talk about the jig in general. The first thing you're going to notice is there's no weed guard on this jig. But this jig is completely weedless. We'll talk about that a little bit more. The second thing is I want you to look at the head. The head is really like a combination of swim jig and flipping head or pitching head. So it's very narrow, comes out to a point, which again is exactly what this jig is made for, to be flipped, to be pitched. Now, the thing I love about this jig, and what makes it probably now one of my very go-to baits, is the fact that it doesn't have that weed guard. That weed guard has been replaced by a screw lock keeper. Now, I will tell you, it's a small screw lock keeper. The one thing I would recommend is probably replacing the keeper with a larger screw lock keeper. It's easy to do. It just snaps right off. The reason why I replace it with a little bigger is because I want a little more bite on the trailers that I use. You don't go through, you don't tear the nose of the plastic out near as much if you replace that with a little larger screw lock on there. The other great thing about this jig is its diversity. Once you put that plastic on there, and I'll show you how to rig them in just a minute, what's great about it is that it becomes a triple threat. So you can flip and pitch it. Once you get that plastic on, it skips tremendously well. So you can skip it around docks, underbrush. It skips very, very well. The other thing is You can also put a swim bait on this, and because of that head design, it's a very good weedless, 110% weedless swim jig. Generally, I keep it very simple on colors. 4 or 5 colors when it comes to jigs. Now, they've got some pretty nice colors, so I expanded it to 6 colors. I know, 6 whopping colors. That's hard to keep up with. But trust me, those 6 colors are going to be more than you'll ever need in a jig. 90% of the time, I'm throwing one of these first 3 colors that I'm about to show you. This is their green pumpkin. So a green pumpkin color, that a lot of times, that's my go-to. The very next color, watermelon. Can't go wrong with a watermelon red, in my opinion. Color number 3, and you can really keep it to these 3 colors. A black jig or a black and blue. That's the next color. Now, this color reminds me a lot of one of my favorite colors, and it's a black, brown, amber color. And this is the Texas Crawl. So this is a color, it's just kind of one of my staple colors. I've just created a lot of confidence in it. The other color, there's really 2 options. This color is the bluegill. And I really like it. It's kind of got a blue sheen to some of the skirt. You can go with Okeechobee Crawl, which is kind of like that green pumpkin with a little bit of blue on it. But I like that color. It's just got almost like a metallic sheen to it. Last but not least, if you're going to use anything as a swim jig, you can't go wrong with good old sexy, or they call it an OG sexy. But you got to have a white if you're going to be fishing around shad. By the way, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch the shad spawn video in post spawn. If you're having a hard time during post spawn, make sure you go check that video out, because it will help you win the post spawn, I promise. We're going to transition into trailers. Colors are going to be super, super simple. We're going to do a green pumpkin. We're going to do a watermelon red. We're going to do a black and blue. We're going to do a white. That's really it. That's, I mean, standard go-to colors. We may tip the claws with some orange or some chartreuse, depending on the time of the year. We may even pull in some summer crawl for around some smallmouth. You know, there's a lot of different tweaks you can do, but we're just talking about base right now. This is your base for fishing this jig, okay? So now let's get into the body types of trailers I like to use. The first trailer is A, when they're going to be super active. B, when I want to slow the fall rate of that jig down just a little bit. C, when I'm not in the heaviest of cover. So if I'm flipping dock posts, boat slips, sometimes this is the golden ticket. Now this one is the Wild Crawl by Bass Munitions. Now I like that style body, again, in the places I told you. If I'm flipping, you know, permanent dock posts, you know, I'm not really skipping. That bait's not the best to skip around docks or boats. If I'm just, you know, open pitching to, you know, open boat slips, that sort of thing. You know, there's several different versions out there. The Wild Crawl is another great one. It's really a little bit bigger, so it's really going to slow things down. Of course, the Rage Crawl, that's a great one. You know, it's just your preference, but the bigger clawed baits are what we're talking about. They're going to really get a lot of flap. They're going to slow the drop of that bait. But those claws are also, if you're flipping around wood or some more heavy structure, they're going to get caught up on that stuff. So if I'm flipping or pitching around, you know, that sort of stuff, this is probably not what I'm going to use most of the time, unless, you know, we've got some good wide gaps. Now, again, active fish, sparser cover, that's the bait I'm going to go to, a slower fall. The next bait we're going to go to, this is one of my favorite all-around baits. I mean, I'll flip this by itself, flip and pitch it. This is the Bass Munitions Grunt. I love the Grunt, but You can also use the vial crawl, another version of a bug style. And of course, there's the structure bug, or whatever they call it, the rage bug from Strike King. Also a great bait. Now that bait, as you can see, is going to be a little more narrow. You've got a lot of appendages. So you're still going to get a flutter. You're still going to slow that bait. It's still going to be a pretty active trailer, but it's a little more compact. Now, the great thing about these is that they do have good wide beaver style bodies, which make them a little better to skip. But again, where they've got really active appendages, it's not going to be my go-to when it comes to skipping, especially if I'm going to try and skip way back up in there. Now, this is a little different than the other two that I mentioned. Now, moving on to my third trailer, and this is kind of my go-to almost year-round when I'm flipping and when I'm pitching. This is the Moab, mother of all beavers, because you can see how big and long it is, by Bass Munitions. Of course, you can go with the rodent or the sweet beaver. There's all kinds of beaver style baits. And what I like about this, these really do nothing. There's nothing here that's really going to cause a lot of flap. It's going to just pretty much fall with the bare minimum of action going down. And that's what I like most of the time when I'm flipping. This is also a great bait and my favorite bait to put on when I'm going to be skipping it around docks or other cover. So now we're going to get into rigging this. I'm going to show you how I rig it. Now the great thing about these baits, I want to show you, you don't even have to trim the skirts. They already trim the skirts to the edge of the hook for you. That's awesome, because one of the things you want to make sure is when you put this on, that it's not inhibiting the action of the trailer. That's where most of your action from a jig is going to come from, the action of the trailer. So let's go ahead and jump into rigging these up. All right, guys, so I'm going to show you how to rig this up. We're going to use the Moab. This is my favorite bait that I like to put on a jig, especially when I'm flipping or pitching. And you'll see this is a very long beaver. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm just going to size it up. I'm going to pull that down, and I'm going to see about where that's going to come out, right there by the head. And so probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it about right there, after about that third rib down. So about right there. And you can see what I like about the ribs, it comes apart pretty easily. Now the very next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this bait over, get that skirt material out of the way. And then we're just going to put this dead center of the bait, and we're going to start turning. Keeping it as straight as we possibly can. And let me tell you, that hook is super, super sharp. Keeping as much as that skirt material out of the way again as we can. And then we're just going to finish tightening it up all the way up on there until it is, I like to screw it up all the way up to about the knot, or not the knot, but the loop. So you can see how far we've got it up on there. Now the very next thing you're going to do, you're just you're just going to judge about where that bait is going to come through. So we're going to come through about right there. We're going to roll this bait down. We're going to come straight through. And then we're just going to give it a little expose. There we go. We've got a nice straight bait. And we are ready to go pitching. Like I said, I love to flip, pitch, and skip during the post spawn. When they pull out any sort of docks, any sort of cover, wood cover, grass line, these bass will move from shallow to deeper water using that stuff. So make sure you get out there, and this is the time of year to have you a jig tied on. All right, BassGeek Nation, you know the drill. Questions, comments in the comment section below. You guys know I love talking about bass fishing, and I love talking about bass fishing with you. So leave those questions down there in the comment section. I greatly appreciate it, and it does help the channel. Like it if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you ring that bell. It is vitally important. And you guys rock.